Hello, and thank you for the invitation to contribute this activity within the Ulysses Alliance. My name is Robert Koglek from MCI, the Entrepreneurial School in Innsbruck, Austria. I'm a lecturer in social work, and my research focuses on diversity, reflexivity, intersectionality, and equity-oriented practice in education and professional training. I would like to reflect on equality, diversity, and inclusion, EDI, in teaching practices through the lens of diversity reflexivity. And I'm going to explain what my understanding of diversity reflexivity means and why I think it matters. And then I would like to discuss how it could be implemented in everyday teaching, practice, and support or be supported at an institutional level, particularly within an alliance like Ulysses. So what is diversity reflexivity and how does it differ from traditional diversity training? Well, diversity reflexivity goes beyond traditional diversity training because it is not a training per se. It is a tool, it is a stance, it's a way of approaching things. This is because traditional diversity training very often focuses on acquiring knowledge about other groups, cultures, other identities. And instead, with diversity reflexivity, we create a continuous reflective process in which educators can examine their own social positioning, their implicit assumptions and biases, and also power relation within the classroom, and how teaching practices may unintentionally reproduce exclusion, discrimination, or inequality. In social pedagogy and social work education, this approach is particularly important because students are being prepared for professions that work directly with power, vulnerability, and social inequality. And traditional diversity training often asks, what should I know about others? But within a diversity reflexivity framework or context, the question would rather be, how do I teach? How do I interact? How do I assess and design learning spaces? And who benefits or is disadvantaged by these choices? Um, I see diversity training or traditional diversity training very often like going to the theater and sitting in the audience, and there's a stage, and on the stage there is a play called Diversity. So diversity plays there, but I'm removed as a spectator, as someone in the audience. And I don't think that this is the right approach. I think we should rather be on stage and we should be part of that play because our diversity plays a major role within understanding diversity of others because we all bring in different aspects of our identity. And if we just sit as someone in the audience, it's almost like we think the way we are is the norm and how it should be, and see the others as others and not as the same kind of diverse people as we are, or we don't see us as diverse people as well. So this approach or this idea, this reflective tool is not limited to social work or social pedagogy. It can be transferred to other academic disciplines as well by really embedding reflexive questions into your curriculum design. So when you start preparing your courses, really thinking about what is it I'm teaching? Why do I want to cover certain aspects of my curriculum? And what do I leave out? And how might people be impacted by that? Because you might, you hold the power in deciding what you're going to teach in the end. So to really create your class, to create the content of your course. And maybe you disadvantage people, maybe you leave people out. And I think that's normal because we can't cover everything and make everyone happy. But I think it already makes a difference when we get into the teaching situation with this awareness, because we can address it and say, I have chosen these topics and there are other topics that I do not cover. And that already invites people more to listen to and to attend, I think. Um, Diversity reflexivity is also about encouraging critical reflection on disciplinary norms, but also to recognize that all fields, whether it's engineering or it's health sciences, are shaped by social power relations. So what do I think by disciplinary norms? I also mean, how do I grade? Do I take into consideration that not everyone might come with the same teaching or education background? People might have had different approaches or experienced different approaches in being interrogated or examined. So, is the way I think students have to demonstrate that they have acquired knowledge, is that really the right way to do it, or might there be another way? And just this process, that would already be part of reflexivity or diversity reflexivity. When we talk about social power relations, walking into the classroom, we as educators or lecturers, we hold the power because we the ones who are going to grade the students. So, and we need to understand this power whilst we can't really change it because we will always be this powerful. But it's about realizing it, but also how we might misuse this power where we exclude certain people. Maybe because not all voices are heard. Maybe because we only listen to a certain number of people. We don't look who are the quiet ones and why might they be quiet, which can also have to do with power within the classroom among the pupils as well. Um, the challenges of implementing this diversity training in the classroom in general. So diversity reflexivity is really about me and my position as a lecturer, as a white male. It could be as a white woman or a black woman, etc. And understanding what that means for the classroom, if what impact it might have, or I might have as well with my power. You can see it, for example, how students from different countries, when they come to our university and different cultures, how they see us as lecturers as well. From some countries, they're more easygoing. With others, they show more respect. They're more respectful. So all these things have to be part in this reflection. So what are the challenges of implementing diversity training in the classroom in general? And I think one major challenge is the diversity of experiences within the classroom itself. Because students and the faculty bring different cultural background, educational histories, social positions, and lived experiences with them. And not only the students, also us as lecturers, we bring our biography with us. We have different classes sitting together. So people coming from different classes. You might have students from an academic background. You might have students who are the first students studying within their family, the first ones from the family going to university. So they might be disadvantaged in getting support as well compared to those that have academic parents and already know more about working at that academically. So really thinking about who do I leave out if I have a certain academic expectation as well, because there might be a group that is very academic, but what do I do to support the others? And why do I have to support them? Well, because they come from a different background, maybe also a different background than myself. Because if I have an academic background coming from an academic family, I might not even be aware of this dissonance. So yes, so these different cultural backgrounds, educational history, social position, lived experience can actually also lead to resistance or defensiveness amongst pupils, but also for us as teachers. And very often I observe that students are very fearful of saying the wrong thing. They don't want to make any mistakes. They don't want to be seen as, as stupid, which they're not if they ask questions, which they're not if they make mistakes, because that's a very important process as well in the learning. It can also lead to the assumption that equity, diversity, and inclusion is only relevant for certain disciplines or student groups, but it is not, because while in the social work context, the majority of students are female, I know that in other disciplines, the majority of students are male. So how do I meet the needs of the female students? How do I make sure that they have the same opportunities than or like the male students who are the majority? Or I have a majority of white students, or I have a majority of black students. So how do I make sure the white students in this class of black students get the same opportunity or recognition as well? And then it also depends on my background. Um, yes. Another challenge is that diversity work is often treated as an add-on rather than as a core pedagogical responsibility. I think we should all be aware of this, of diversity, and use this thinking of diversity in our classroom. And when I teach, I don't know, in medicine, a doctor, I need to have diversity aspects in my teaching, because this person will work with a different with people from different backgrounds, with a very diverse group of people in the future. And that's the same for someone who studies tourism, for example. They will work with people with different beliefs as well and nationalities. So we need to prepare them for that already in all our lectures. And that does not mean that I always have to lecture on diversity. No, these are little things like in social work, when we talk about a family, we could talk about a heterosexual family, which assumes there might be homosexual families as well, or same-sex partners that have children. So already you open something up. When we talk about yes, when we talk about certain people, maybe, or we use certain papers, academic work. Why not using some from countries from the global south, that where research has happened, and instead of only focusing on the global north and what is familiar to us, as long as there is something available. So, so I think the challenge is that diversity is often treated as the add-on, can also be addressed by normalizing discomfort as part of learning, by saying, well, I might make mistakes. I might address people incorrectly because I might have never come across a certain group of people or a culture. But I can only learn when they tell me. And the moment I open myself to this vulnerability as a teacher as well, I think you create a different space for learning for both, for yourself as a teacher, but also for all the other students as well. I also think it's important to use structured reflection tools rather than just relying on personal opinions. This is something that we learn in social work and social pedagogy, because reflection is the major part of our job as well, to really think about how did this intervention go, what could I have done differently, where did I leave the client, etc. And that's also with students. So how did my class go? What didn't I pay attention to? Was there something happening in this on the one side of the classroom? What could it be? And really think about it and change that. But that also asks us to feel to allow this critical self-reflection. And I also think equity, diversity, and inclusion is a shared responsibility and not an individual moral task or an individual task. This is something that should be embraced by organizations and really, embraced by everyone working in that organization. But that can only happen when I, as a university, for example, allow educators for themselves to have safe spaces for reflection and learning without the expectation of being perfect. The benefits of equity, diversity, and inclusive focused teaching for students, staff, and institutions, I think, is, well, especially for students. For students, inclusive and reflexive teaching practices could be an increase in engagement and participation, but also it will support a sense of belonging for students, because they can make more of a connection with the lecturer as well, and prepare them for working in diverse, complex professional environments. And for academic stuff, I think an equity and diversity and inclusion focused teaching can strengthen reflective teaching skills, because I will always ask myself afterwards, what could I do differently? And maybe in preparation, you will already start thinking about, okay, what do I need to be aware of this class? What happened last time, and who's in this class? How diverse is the class, if you know about that? For academic stuff, it also means or could mean you reduce classroom conflict by making power dynamics explicit. You name them, you talk about them, and you also support professional growth and pedagogical intervention. And you also support professional growth and pedagogical innovation, because you're trying something new, you're going a new direction, and you try to be more inclusive in general. At an institutional level, a university benefits through improved student retention and success. I think that students will be more likely to stay in a course where they feel they belong. And belonging sometimes is identified or defined by feeling heard and feeling that you have a voice. And also on an institutional level also means you can probably have strong international collaborations, because you go into these collaborations more open-minded, with maybe less biases, or at least the biases that you might have or you will have, because we all have biases, are more reflected and you're aware of them. And you have to try to see, okay, how can I get around that? And how can these biases now be put away to start this international collaboration? Yes, and it also promotes a learning culture that values critical thinking and social responsibility and equity. And I think this is what we all want from our students in general. So implementing diversity in teaching practices. Diversity reflexivity requires both professional and personal reflection. Professionally, lecturers can ask whose knowledge is represented in my syllabus, what assumptions underpin my teaching methods and assessments, and which students are most visible and which remain silent, as I said earlier. So professionally, lecturer can ask whose knowledge is represented in my syllabus, as I said earlier. Professionally, lecturers can ask whose knowledge is represented in my syllabus. Do I have voices from different countries, continents as well, or is it just one view? What assumptions underpin my teaching methods and assessments, and which students are most visible and which remain silent? And trying to understand why could that be? Why are they silent and the others are more visible? But on a personal level, reflection includes awareness of one's own social position, recognition of privilege and vulnerability, and also an openness to feedback and learning. And this does not mean sharing personal details in the classroom, but rather being conscious of how your personal experiences shape professional practice. Because you're still your personal self in the classroom when you're there. You can't leave that behind and just be an educator or a teacher. And inclusive teaching also means acknowledging the different learning styles, linguistic backgrounds, and access needs, and designing a learning environment that is rather flexible than uniform as well. And the role universities can play is really recognizing these different cultural, national, and institutional contexts, as well as or still committing to shared values around equity, inclusion, and social justice. And a unified approach does not necessarily mean standardization, but it means to have shared principles and to really be aware of these principles on diversity, and to look of how do we live these principles? Where can I see that we talk about our organization as being a very diverse organization? Or is it just written somewhere? Where can I see that we live it? Yes, and I also think it's important with cross-university collaborations, because they allow institutions to learn from different practices, as long as we're open to that. And they also challenge our own assumptions, and they co-create frameworks that are both flexible and also value-driven. To support inclusive, diversity sensitive teaching, I think that academic staff need ongoing professional development. So that goes beyond a one-off workshop, that combines the theory with practical tools, including reflective tools and dialogical formats as well, to really, well, learn to question yourself. And this kind of training should really include reflexive exercises on power, on biases, on positionality, if we want it to be effective. And we need to have an institutional recognition of equity, diversity, and inclusion as an academic piece of work. Yes, so maybe to conclude, diversity reflexivity is not a checklist or a technique. It's an ongoing pedagogical stance. And it invites us as educators and institutions to continuously reflect on how teaching practices shape inclusion and exclusion and belonging. And by embedding diversity reflexivity into our everyday teaching and into our institutional strategies, universities can contribute not only to academic excellence, but also to more equitable and social, responsible higher education.